I was going to look it up on my phone. Okay, I can look it up on mine. Yep. Oh crap! Yeah, 1201. Yeah, I just did it again.
It won't work if you don't dial 5 first.
1201.
Yes.
Hi all. Is there anyone on the line? We are getting ready to go again on that. Go.
All right. Hopefully everybody got fed here. If you didn't, we still got a few lunches left. So please, I think each person has to eat about probably 7 pounds of food before you leave to get it all gone. And so feel free to work on that. So to kick off the afternoon here, where we're going to turn the tables over to the partners now, we have a very honored guest who's going to say a few words first. And then we're going to kick off 9 partner presentations that were volunteered by you. And we'll just keep it going after that and let anybody else offer their thoughts, their directions for the future, and how we can all connect better to get better results in conservation in Colorado. And I wanted to encourage all of the presenters to not feel that this has to be focused on CNHP. In fact, things that you're doing that connect all of us, I think, make for a greater whole in the end. So anything you got is going to be good. So on that note, I think I'm going to pass it over to Joyce.
Thanks very much. Well, I hope I can do this. I've had laryngitis the last couple days, so I'm a little croaky. I'm sorry, but I apologize for being late. But it's wonderful to see everybody and to be able to welcome you. I understand. I didn't realize this was the first partners meeting. Is that true? You guys are awesome. It's just amazing how many people are here. So I'm going to try and stay for a while this afternoon, too, so I can to hear some of this. Really, my message for you all is a very simple one, but heartfelt, and that is just thank you and congratulations for all you do on behalf of threatened plants and species and biodiversity in Colorado. Can you all hear me back there? Okay, good. This is good. Doesn't feel like this is on.
That thing's just recording. It didn't sound very good through the speakers.
Oh, I see. So I can just...
You're doing the right thing.
Okay, good. Anyway, I don't know if you all saw, and I guess it's a little controversial in Colorado right now, that the governor's logo is, it's our nature. Have you all heard that? Is it going to stick, do you think? Small? Maybe. Anyway, I think that's great for conservation. I love it to brand, that's how he's branding Colorado, as he should. I've gotten kind of sentimental about this because I was thinking back when CNHP first came to Colorado, and that was in 1994, and we were just so excited. Al Dyer was dean then, and we were so excited to have CNHP here. We thought it was really great that CSU got it away from that other place, right? And
Someone from that university here.
well, I'm sorry. And, I have a daughter who's a grad of that university, so it's all right. But we still wanted you all here. And so 20 years now, 20 years, that is just so amazing. And, when I think about that, I think so much about how the breadth and the depth of the program has grown. And, also we have a rock star here with CNHP, and no one I can remember at CSU has ever done a wine in honor of CNHP. Beer, I'm sorry.
Looks like a wine.
That is so bad. And I know it's Odell's. Can you tell I'm not a beer drinker? And so, you know, for us, CNHP and all the work that you all do, you've really become a role model for us. And in terms of the excellence of the work that's being done, and you all take credit for all of that too. And I think of the breadth and depth of the work now, you know, how much it's expanded into so many areas and wonderfully in so many partnerships. And then, you know, the impact that you're making that really throughout Colorado and the region too enhances the well-being not only of natural communities but of human communities too. I think more and more we understand those things come together. You know, so in turn of, I'm sorry, I missed my one place here. I can't talk and do two things at once here. So when I think about CNHP and your work and what really distinguishes it, you know, I think about the excellence of these programs and the impact, as I started to say, and also the partnerships, how you all have built partnerships. I never expected to see this many people here this morning. And I can tell you as dean, when I talk about what I think is unique about our college, it is about how what we care so much and what's so important are our partnerships. And so this is a prime role model of what we want to do, of course, throughout the college. The other impact that I've seen as I'm looking through the years now with CNHP is how much that they're engaged at Colorado in educating the next generation of conservationists, which we want all our students to be, having interns in their programs and hourlies and AmeriCorps, and helping them develop the kinds of skills that you all have that our next generation is going to have. And so, and they're also coming in and teaching in our classes too. So it's so wonderful to have this kind of program be totally connected to the academic side of the college too. So for CNHP and the work that you all do, I just can't tell you how much it enriches our college. I know you're enriching the health of the land and people, but also you all are for all of us too, and the lessons that we can learn from all of you. And so in honor of that, and because I only realized yesterday, this is your 20th anniversary, that on behalf of the college, I'm going to give a gift of $25,000 for you all to, you know, take something a little bit greater or do something more you can do with it and everything, because this is really a special time and event.
Well, okay,
so,
I gotta give you that.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Thank you all. Now I'm eager to hear more about your projects, so I'm going to stay as long as I can.
Okay. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Joyce. This day is full of wonderful surprises. Well, you've done a tremendous amount in supporting CNHP. We have flourished with you being a dean of our college, so we're grateful to you and have loved working with you. And if it takes an extra month or two to hire the person that comes in, that's really fine with us. I know you've got plans, but well, thank you so much. Let's go ahead then and turn this over to you all. I wanted to read the order that we're going to go in here, just real quick. We're going to kick it off with TNC, who's got a presentation, a few slides for us, followed by NPS. Carl Brown's going to step up. I'm going to then BLM. Bruce and Carol have something for us. I'm going to give the mic to Del Benson briefly to talk about the Congress that he's working on. And then we'll go Forest Service, Peter McDonald. Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Francie. Air Force Academy, Brian Milbachler's going to step up. and then Billy Bunch will come up from EPA, followed by State Land Board. Mindy Gottsagen's going to speak. She had to jump out, so if, oh, you're still here, okay. So if Mindy's not back in time, we'll go ahead. The last person is Southern Rockies LCC. So we might switch it depending on what happens with you. So let's turn it over now to TNC. You want to come on up, Chris? And Tim. Oh, yeah, let's get no slides. Okay. And it's really fun to introduce these guys. They are such good old friends of ours. And, of course, Chris understands my work like very few others can since he used to be CNHP's director. So I'm going to...
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Sullivan. I'm the State Director of the Nature Conservancy. I'm going to turn this microphone over to Chris Pegg to make the presentation. As David just mentioned that Chris used to be the director of CNHP when CNHP was part of the Nature Conservancy. I joined the Conservancy a little more than 8 years ago after we had split off the Heritage Program and Nature Serve and other things. And what I will say as someone relatively new, and I think it's important for the future, one is that there is no doubt, even joining the Nature Conservancy afterwards, that the heritage programs broadly and the Colorado Natural Heritage Program are probably still the best idea the Nature Conservancy ever had and are still fully in our DNA. They drive the thinking, the way of looking at the world that you continue to demonstrate, not only in a static way, but in a much more dynamic way. The future still represents the way we want to look at the world at the Nature Conservancy. So even though we've spun off, the CNHP remains our strongest partner in Colorado, and by being independent organizations, I think we're able to do much, much more. And it's great to think about collaboration and for you and us to be thinking of ways we can continue to work together. And so I just wanted to say how much I value the work that CNHP does, how much it means to us as an organization. When I look at the future of the state of Colorado and what we can do together, and everybody in this room, it's amazing because we have these sorts of partnerships. But I'm going to turn it over to Chris to give a little more nuanced discussion of where we've been and where we could go together, because he has a unique perspective, having been and had so much his feet in both parts of the camp. For those of you who don't know, Chris came to Colorado to run the Heritage Program with the Nature Conservancy 22 years ago now. And I think would echo my statement that you remain our most valued and most important partner, and really still part of, absolutely central to our DNA, even if the faces have changed. So I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Tim. I was looking to see if you were going to whip out a $25,000 check. We'll talk about that again in the spring, right? Again, thanks. And Tim, I just echo a lot of what you say. For the whole Nature Conservancy, we started in 1951, and our goal was to save wild places first, and then to save nature. And we defined it variably through the years, but we finally, in the 1970s, hired a scientist out of Harvard to try and figure out a method, and that method evolved into the method that you see today, but it's advanced, it's evolved way beyond what we first started with. And I'll come back to that in a minute, but still, with now the mission of the Nature Conservancy basically to save the lands and waters on which all life depends. It's really a holistic definition, but it goes beyond the species that we started with, but it's still founded on that. It's still founded on those basic fundamental pieces of biodiversity that we all love and cherish, and when they all work together, they create all the ecological processes and all the ecological services and benefits and all the things that we both love, enjoy, and need. So the first thing that I want to make sure I break from this, so I got here on February the 22nd in 1992. It didn't take very long to find out some of the stars in the state that needed to be brought into the Natural Heritage Network and agreed. And I want to start off with, although I'm maybe a month early, Lee Greneau, 20 years in March, is that right? Yeah. Susan Spackman and Renee Rondeau. The 20, yeah, thanks. And what I can say is one of you know, there's a lot of great people in Colorado working on conservation issues and the science, of course, from the university systems, of course, especially CSU. But, you know, we have also created some of the best natural historians in Colorado, and these are amongst those people in their various roles that they play. And that's so fundamental to our ability to understand the connections between man and nature, is to really have that natural history, to educate those kids, to be able to tell those stories, to be able to explore and find those new things and create that excitement into others, including those of us who sometimes get a little maybe stuck on the desk job too much. I don't do too much of that, but I do some. So let me just real quickly say that it was TNC's idea to create natural heritage methodology and natural heritage programs. Then they helped get it started here in the state. Well, state governments are notoriously challenging to maintain something, especially in the West, where you don't want to say anything about rare and imperiled in those days. And yet, you really want to also be truthful about the status of diversity at that time. And so, the Natural Areas program in state governments had a challenging time for a little while. So the Nature Conservancy agreed to take it back again and kind of reconfigure it and see if there was a way to make it a little more fertile ground so that it could provide all the services. And mind you, some of those people are still some of the best naturalists in this region that worked at the Natural Areas programs at that time. Really phenomenal work. But we did that. We took it out. We started it up, and yes, we did go to that other university. And really, one of the main reasons we're here is because anybody who knows me knows that business management is not my forte. But one of the main reasons that we're here is because I misread that contract where they said you have room for 2 to 3 people at the CU Museum, and I read that as 23. So when we came here, we had 23 people, and that was a pretty big thing. So anyway, so now we are, CSU is the home. It's the best home. It's a great home. A museum would be a wonderful place to be too, but CSU is that outreach university, that core functional research, the combination of all those elements. And this is a great place. Let's see. You know, one of the fundamental things that has changed in the time that the Nature Conservancy started the Natural Heritage Program here, or restarted it, is that we were founded basically with the Endangered Species Act. That was how the priority method came. We'll save all the endangered species first, and then we'll get around to the common things. Okay, we know how that worked. We're still working on all the endangered species and all the common things. And now we're working on life support systems. So I wanted to just make that point because there's been this evolution of the Natural Heritage Program, as well as all of us have evolved in the kinds of things that we work on. Let's see. Well, at first it was about trying to figure out how are we going to fund this thing? How are we going to get this in place? The Nature Conservancy was not going to be able to fund it indefinitely. They were willing to put in some startup money, and some of the first things we did was say, well, what use of the data? We already knew that it was useful, but we had to get that word out there in a little more of an environment of service, more than just collecting the data. And so we were pretty successful, I think, at that when we first got started. And in a minute, I can stop saying we, because when we did get to CSU, then that was the point where we diverged and said, okay, this is a great home, it's a great program with great people. Now you got to figure out how to support yourself. And that's a challenging thing. I know I just sent my daughter to college this year, and I'm still not free of her yet on the financial side. But it was really an important time because of the Endangered Species Act, recovery plans, the Forest Management Act, resource management planning. The Division of Wildlife was coming up, at that time it was the Division of Wildlife, was coming up with various different kinds of planning. But we were all realizing also that we had to take another step. And so that takes us to the next generation of what I think, and where, again, as Tim said, it was really fundamental with us because we realized at the time when we said to the Nature Serve, the former Heritage Network, you need to move along a little bit on your own, which I still think was a real challenging thing for the Nature Conservancy to do. I didn't like it because of where I came up in the organization. But what was fundamentally different was we recognized that we said we were going to save the last of the least and then the best of the rest, and we weren't even started. So we had to think of new tools, and the Natural Heritage Network still remained the foundational piece of information, but we moved along in that area, and we started doing things like conservation action planning, We started doing eco-regional planning. We started working with the Division of Wildlife again on various kinds of larger scale planning. We were working with the Forest Service and BLM on various kinds of planning, and the Natural Heritage Program did a phenomenal job of providing, again, that basic support while evolving in their own tools and their own methods and refining that method of pulling it all together. One of the cases that I want to bring up, because we often think of this as the data collecting organization, they hand it to everybody else to do the work, but I want to make a really interesting story, because the first contract that we had, and I can say we here, in 1992, was to do a county survey for Jefferson County. In that survey, the results showed about 80+ places that merited some consideration and some 24 or so high priority ones. Now here, priorities for conservation action. 65% of those recommendations are today part of the Open Space and Natural Areas Program properties. So that's the use of the data. That's the real effect that it has. And I've seen it whether it's the San Juan, Rio Grande forest management plans, and whether there's this tremendous actual on-the-ground impact from the data that are being used. And that's what I wanted to really seal with that. In the same way that the Nature Conservancy still uses the data to prioritize and determine what it is that we need to do on certain properties when we're working on them, and I know many other people do as well. So that's just an example of some of the work that the Natural Heritage Program has done, and some of that was done in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. Eco-regional assessments, that was really a big deal. They're all over North America now. There's eco-regional plans, so to speak, for the entirety of North America and much of the rest of the world. World Wildlife Fund adopted that methodology and developed it. So it's really been an important play. And the natural heritage data were foundational in that. I'm going to skip over because I dare not go too long on this, but in one of the things is in the next level. You know, I hear it all the time about we can't do single species, and it's true, we can't do them one at a time. That we have to now focus more on social values. And we do. We have to focus more on social values. We've got a growing population of people that need food, they need high-quality water, they need all these things. We've got to focus on that. We've got to be more efficient in what we're doing with limited resources, both in people and dollars. And so one of the things that I think has been phenomenal is to watch the Natural Heritage Network and programs grow in that methodology. I've already mentioned eco-regional planning and now new types of conservation planning. Climate change and adaptation studies, we're working together with them on some studies. They're on their own on other studies, but it's really fundamental to figuring out how this all plays, how we can adapt and have both nature and people in the same places where they co-occur. But now even more social benefits. How do we tie these things into social benefits that are relevant and meaningful to people is going to be a big challenge. And then finally, as one of the reports that was talked about, the measures of success, I would say it's actually measures of progress and success. We need to have a better way, and I think the Natural Heritage Program here was foundational in pulling that together, is tracking. How are we doing so that we can adjust as we go rather than have the same list of rare and imperiled species year after year after year? How are we making progress? Are we making progress? And where we're going, and there's just some fundamental work to the point where even they have occurrences of whole ecological systems. Where are the best patches of shortgrass prairie, of spruce fir forest? That's a phenomenal innovation in that system. One more example, the data from the Heritage Network, we know they're relevant, but if the person who's going to use them doesn't understand that they're relevant, it doesn't matter. So an example that's just been phenomenal for us has been to watch, because for 21 years I've been trying to figure out how conservation can occur in the southeast part of the state, and Renee got infected with the same bug. But here's the thing. Would you have thought 10 years ago you could go into Las Animas County and Baca County and say, hey, we want to do a county inventory for rare and imperiled species? No. But they realized that those data were going to be important once the Department of Defense challenged them by saying, we're going to purchase 2 more million acres down here. Purchase doesn't mean purchase in their language in that part of the world. But the Natural Heritage Network, all those people, had dozens of people working down there in an environment which 20 years ago would have been target practice. and actually providing data to people so that they can use it to make good conservation decisions. That's the future, whether it be for agencies or for more landowners or for the kids that need to find this information. That's where I think they're headed. They're innovative, and they're going to make it. So basically, you know, for us, in our partnership with the Nature Conservancy, as Tim said, they are foundational. That information doesn't change in the sense of how important it is. But how we use it is going to change. And we have to use it in ways that will make people start using it on their own rather than us trying to cram it down their throats. And we have to make it so that it fits into models of making sure we get bigger, better, faster conservation. So I want to thank you guys, and I want to challenge you to step up even more to that. And I'm really, really proud to have ever been associated with you, and the Nature Conservancy will continue, as Tim said, to support you guys and use that information to the best extent that we can to save life. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, sir. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. All right. Carl Brown is up next, representing National Park Service.
I'll do my best to keep the recording going. Good afternoon. It's always a challenge to be the speakers after lunch because everyone settles in, they get nice and comfortable. And with range in this, it's okay to wander the room. I don't have to like stay up here. Good. Great. Good. Well, I'm here, and Tammy Cook's here with me, and I actually hired her through CNHP and then converted her to a Fed back in the good old days when we could do that. So it's a great part of that. Partnership is very, very important to us, and I just have to give you a little bit of thumbnail history here. I spent 10 years in the Forest Service in Regions 6, 1, and 2. I worked here on the Arapahoe Roosevelt from 79 to 88, and have been exposed to all of the inventory and mapping efforts of most of our sister bureaus, and been doing that most of my career, and I'm very pleased to be able to tell you about our program. We are with the Park Service. We don't belong to Rocky Mountain National Park. We actually belong to the Washington office, and many of you that are here in this town know there's lots of detached Washington office groups that hover around in Fort Collins. It's a very fertile place for that. I think we're, maybe the next most dense grouping of federal, groups in the area, with the possible exception of the Denver Federal Center. So I was able to start with the Park Service in '92, and we had the GIS division down there start a vegetation mapping program which predated our inventory and monitoring efforts. And our goal was to try to get maps made for all of the national parks that had natural resources, and at that time that was about 270 parks. And we wanted to do it in 10 years. Okay, and those of you that have worked around the feds or through the feds or been around any kind of that recognize that that was quite hopeful. Okay, that started in '94, and we were able to get some prototypes done. We teamed up with TNC. We were able to work through the beginnings, the very beginnings of getting the data sets necessary to start building the National Veg Classification Standard, which now is in its second hierarchy. You saw some slides about the Federal Geographic Data Committee, and it's now in its 2008 version. We were able to contribute to the data sets that created that original effort through TNC, then NatureServe, and you were ABI in the middle there somewhere in between. You had a couple of name changes. So the veg inventory, let me just give you a thumbnail. It's really a three-step process. We have a 12-step, which is great. You start with, I have a problem, and then you work your way through to the end of that. But the three major things are the boots on the ground that do the taxonomic classification. The idea is to get the information on what is out there, what is growing, how does it break into taxonomic groups, and we are focusing on the next to finest level of detail in that NVC hierarchy. We're working down there in the Alliance Association level. So this is not Landsat level mapping. This is way down there in the 1 to 24,000 scale. So we're down in there. So we start out with that taxonomic classification. Then we do image analysis. It used to be aerial photography. Now we're into digital imagery. But we do the image analysis. We're able to get that digital map made. It is a geodatabase. And then the third step is there's actually an accuracy assessment. And I've talked with my counterparts in the Forest Service I used to work with. I've talked to Matt Bobo at the BLM. I've talked to all of our sister agencies. Most of them can't afford to do an accuracy assessment. It's the first thing that falls off the budget block. They can make a map, but they can't check it. They can't tell you what their confidence is in it. So those are the 3 steps: taxonomic classification, doing a digital map, and doing an accuracy assessment. We are part of, as I said, the Washington office. We have an inventory and monitoring division. We're funded through them. We don't belong to them. We're actually in the biology division. I'm a forester by degree. And we have this team made up of Tammy, myself, and the inventory and monitoring folks. And you might also know that the Fish and Wildlife's inventory and monitoring group was just stood up, and they have co-located in the building with us. We're down at Harmony in LeMay. We're not in the little mini Fed Center here. But too many of our division chiefs owned houses in Oak Ridge, so they didn't want to move here. So we're down there in the Oak Ridge area. But Fish and Wildlife bought the 3rd floor, and they've moved their inventory and monitoring group up there. So we're teaming up with them to help them. So we're about 70% complete. Okay, there's a good statistic for you. We have like 10 million acres mapped, 8.5 million acres underway, and 12 million to go. Okay, so we have a lot of the small, low-hanging fruit is done, and the ones that are left are the whales, I guess is what I would call them. The last big park we just finished was Grand Canyon. Okay, that's not a small landscape, so 1.6 million acres, something like that. So again, we started in '94. We were helpful in getting the NVC primary development going, and we've spent a lot of time working with 3 kinds of partners. We've got the ability to use academics through what are called the Cooperative Ecosystem Study Units, CESUs. That's how we're able to get to the folks here at Colorado Natural Heritage Program. We're able to do interagency agreements, which is how we can use anybody from any other federal agency. We do work with the Bureau of Reclamation, the BLM, others. And the third, and my least favorite, is contracting. Just because all of you who've worked through contracts know how much fun those are to prepare. But those are the 3 ways we get things done. So, we have the advantage of using CNHP and teaming up with CEML here, the Center for Ecological Management of Military Lands here at Colorado State. And they help us with study plans. CNHP has also helped us with the plots database development here with Michelle Fink. A lot of this work has been with Joe Stevens, of course, in that he's been the main person that's been our contact and helped with that. So that plots database development, you saw some slides of the work that was going on at Rocky Mountain and also down at Great Sand Dunes, and those have been tremendously helpful. And the other part of the partnership is with the USGS. I was 12 years in the USGS. Recall Secretary Babbitt creating the Biological Survey. Anybody remember that? Okay. I was part of that large sucking sound of all the science being pulled out of the interior agencies. For a while, I was in the Biological Survey, and that lasted, 18 months, and then we were all magically introduced into the USGS as the biology division. So I went through all of that. I escaped in 2005 and came back to the Park Service. But we have a long collaboration with the USGS, and we work with the Fort Collins Science Center here. They're helping us with some efforts in the Klamath Network in the Oregon, California area at Lassen Volcanic, and a lot of work with the Upper Mississippi Ecological Science Center, UMESC, located in La Crosse, Wisconsin. They've done a lot of mapping for us. Glacier, they've done 15 or 20 maps for us. They're working on the Appalachian Trail with us right now. And this is a great example of a partnership that's involved the ability to leverage multiple organizations under an umbrella. This is where NatureServe is very helpful to us in that if we had to get all of the coordination done for the Appalachian Trail, now recall the Appalachian Trail starts in Georgia and goes to Maine. Okay? It goes through 14 different states. Okay? So coordinating 14 different natural heritage programs to help get stuff done is a lot of coordination, and we're quite happy to have NatureServe do that for us. So it works out very well. So that's a great example of how we're doing that kind of thing for our programs. The other one here that Joe Stevens mentioned earlier was at Bighorn Canyon. This is on the Wyoming-Montana border. It's an interesting effort. It's got some other public lands around it, some BLM. The Pryor Mountain area has a horse range. It also has a northern neighbor, the Crow Nation. And Native American issues, when we're doing these kind of inventories, has a whole lot of interesting philosophical issues. But being able to work through that and getting that project done has been a really good project. And one thing today, it's one reason I have to leave early, is we're going to have a call today with the Chief of Resources up there, in that through the inventory, Joe's team was able to locate a relic stand of aspen that the park did not know existed. And it turns out that we have an interesting possible study opportunity, if anyone here is into plant genetic material work. This appears that it may be a hybrid stand between aspen and Fremont cottonwood. It's got phenological appearances of both. So there's that potential for an aspen study. And of course the management choices that go with that, with this stand under the influence of either wildlife or any of the other possible herbivory issues. They may want to fence it, but there are things that come out of these studies that always are fascinating and interesting for how we do that. So we're currently working on some large park efforts in our future here. We're working in the Mojave network, and there are some large landscapes down there. Mojave Preserve is over 1 million acres. Death Valley is, 1.5 million. We've got those coming up. We're working in the Chihuahuan Desert Network down in the Texas area with Big Bend, which is a huge park on the Rio Grande River. The Rio Grande is part of that, and on down to Amistad, down further down in Texas. We're working in the North Coast and Cascade Network. We just finished Rainier. They're getting into Olympic, and we're going to go over to North Cascades. And from a sampling perspective, we've got places in the Olympics that are a 4-day walk to get to a sample point. Okay, so we're not doing random sampling here. We're doing cost surfaces. If we got some data we can get in the front country that has the same signature as something in the back, we're not going to send somebody in for a 4-day walk. Now that might be a nice backpacking trip, but that's a pretty expensive point to get to. But those are the kinds of places where we're working. And then, of course, the other network that we're working with is the Greater Yellowstone Network. Bighorn Canyon is in that, and Yellowstone. We haven't done Yellowstone yet, but Yellowstone's got a lot of data. Yellowstone's had a little bit of change since '88, you might think. And so we've got quite a bit going on with that effort. So I think we're 6 to 8 years out from completion. I'm thinking that might be about when I retire. I think when we get these done, that might be nice. We are transitioning to really working on landscape health and the effects of climate change and how you can do adaptation planning for that. We're creating a product that is a good baseline data set. It's a 1 to 24,000 scale, minimum mapping unit half-hectare kind of thing. But that's not going to give you fine enough monitoring data to figure out, are the plants moving uphill? But it can give you a great baseline for doing that. And some of the Gloria stuff that you saw that Joe Stevens is working on is helping to give some idea of that adaptation. So in addition to that, I also wanted to point out some other partnerships and leave really kind of a message of hope. We do a lot that supports the CSU student body. And in addition to that, being a forester and being involved with the Society of American Foresters and Al Dyer and the Forestry School, and I did my master's and PhD here. We do a lot with the State Forest Service. In fact, I was talking with Mike before he left this morning, the State Forest Service gentleman that was here. He's going down to testify about what they're going to be doing in the near future and how they're able to support both mitigation and wildfire control. We also, take the students out and give them on-the-ground ability to look at these kinds of things, working with the Society of American Foresters. There's also a Front Range group that does that. And the nice thing about that is that, being affiliate faculty, working with the students, pointing out these things, they're always wanting to hear about how things are going on in the real world. What do we do? I go into a remote sensing class and talk about how we use this data to make these decisions, and they really like that because it's really not, it's not about books, it's not about the concepts. It's really a practical way of doing that. So, in summary, here we're doing vegetation and landscape biodiversity measures. We're helping to do that. We're feeding a monitoring program. We're the inventory side of the monitoring program. And in working with our other sister bureaus like Matt Bobo and the BLM and with Forest Service, they've got Dave Tart from Region 4 who's helping with the National Veg Classification Standard. Also, we've been able to talk with the Forest Service about their R2 Veg data set. And really, in my experience of working in the Forest Service and in working in the USGS and now with the Park Service, A lot of people that I know in the forestry group have said, wow, you kind of went to the dark side. You know, you went to the Park Service. And, you know, I hear that and it's like, you know, I'm not sure where they kind of get that. Because what I've seen in my experience is we're way more similar than we are different. We're working on the same landscape. We've got the same issues. We're dealing with the same bugs. We're dealing with the same fire. And we're trying to get the same kind of data. Now, we may make a little bit different use of the data for the management thing. But what I do know is from the products that we produce, at least two things immediately come from a veg map. One, it gets turned into a fire and fuels map, because what burns? It's the vegetation. Second, it gets turned into a habitat map, because the vegetation creates the basis of the habitat that's there for the wildlife. So it's great to produce this inventory data set. It's fun to work on it. And I look forward to another 6 to 8 years of doing it, and great partnerships in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. It has been a wonderful adventure to work with you on all of these things, and same with you, Tammy. And I think you guys, so Denver Botanic Gardens is here, right? You guys should talk about conservation genetics stuff, so because they have really amazing capacity there to answer those questions. Okay, let's see who's up next. I think it's BLM. Bruce? And Carol?
Yeah, Carol, get up here. I have to bring my sidekick with me. My name is Bruce Rittenhouse. I'm the branch chief for natural resources in the Colorado State Office, and I've been working with David for the last couple years and a few folks here. When you hear BLM, you know, we're a multiple use agency, or in many cases multiple abuse agency. You know, when you hear about us in the news, you hear oil and gas leasing, coal development, you know, grazing, those kinds of things. And you know, historically the BLM, and I think that, you know, I used to work with the Forest Service as well, and Forest Service is probably in the same situation, and maybe in the Park Service as well. But typically, you know, in the past, we as in our offices have been focused project by project with our eyes at the ground. We're not looking at where, you know, the bigger picture. We're looking at this 20-acre project, and usually it's you know, it's somebody coming in to develop some land, whether it's an oil and gas lease or whatever. So, you know, but we've been focused primarily on our project level stuff and not seeing the bigger picture. And so when Jim Caswell was our director a few years ago under Kempthorne, you know, there's this train wreck coming along that's called greater sage grouse, and he looked at it from a perspective of, you know, if we do not deal, we as in the BLM do not deal with greater sage grouse. And I don't know if we've really dealt with spotted owl, but he used the analogy, we need to deal with greater sage grouse like we've dealt with spotted owl. Develop a landscape level plan for that species and its habitats and those species that are dependent on those old growth forest habitats. So he directed our leadership in BLM about in 2005, 6, to develop a landscape level approach, which, and he presented that to our executive leadership team, our state directors, and those state directors said, whoa, they pushed back big time. And basically, I think we're in denial of that process. And so, and having worked in the Northwest, I saw the benefits of blurring the boundary lines between BLM and Forest Service and that. So, you know, so what BLM has been doing in the last few years started with the American Recovery Act. Was we got monies, and there was some folks back in the Washington office said we need to start doing these landscape level analyses, and I think that's going to be kind of the message we're hearing now, especially like when Kevin wraps this up and and when Kevin wraps this all up in a nice bow at the end with the Landscape Conservation Cooperative. So. So BLM, you know, used that to start developing these what are called rapid ecoregional assessments, and that was kind of our landscape level shot. And so we started developing these what are called REAs, and essentially what they are is an REA is taking existing data and looking at and collecting that information through development of management questions, conservation elements, and change agents are the three key terms in the development of those documents. And so the change agents that BLM has looked at are invasive species, wildfire, development, and climate change are the 4 change agents. The conservation elements are varied based on, you get a group of biologists and specialists together and hydrologists and look at, the specific conservation elements within that ecoregional area. One of the first ones that was started was the Colorado Plateau, which encompasses primarily all of eastern Utah and a large portion of western Colorado. So that has been now completed, and so that was kind of the first step, and now we've kicked in several other REAs in the process. In Colorado alone, we have, and again, these cross state boundaries. So the other ones we're doing in Colorado are the Wyoming Basins, which is kind of the northwest corner of the state and into Wyoming. Southern Great Plains, which includes down southeastern part of the state. And then the fourth one is, I think I wrote it here. Well, we would like to start the Southern Rockies, and we will be talking with the Forest Service soon about that one again. So, and we're also doing one in the San Luis Valley and northern New Mexico as a response to potential solar mitigation, solar applications down there. And so, which kind of dovetails into the second part of our landscape approach, is developing, instead of looking at this 20-acre project and developing mitigation for that project, well, we're going to leave this many trees, or we're going to only cut this much vegetation. We're looking at now mitigation from a regional perspective. And so we're developing these assessments, and then we can develop areas where we're going to focus our regional mitigation or mitigation for certain projects. And the term that we've used in BLM is, what we're trying to do is to get rid of or get away from random acts of restoration. So that's kind of the concept here is with budgets tightening and squeezing down, and we want to get the biggest bang for our buck in our mitigation and in our restoration part, which kind of segues into our third aspect of the regional or of the landscape approach, is identifying focal areas for healthy land, what we call the healthy lands focus areas. And these are areas where we're identifying large landscapes, and we're talking multiple watersheds across numerous boundaries, across state boundaries, and looking at what are the restoration needs within those focal areas. The example that we're looking at here in Colorado is the Dolores River. We've had a great partnership with the Dolores River Group, where we're removing tamarisk and other invasive species and restoring riparian habitats in that river basin. And I mean, I would recommend, if you're interested in going to that, again, Nature Conservancies is a big partner in that, along with several folks, the Tamarisk Coalition. Just Google the Dolores River Restoration Partnership, and their website is awesome, and you'll see the amazing work that they've done with youth volunteers and so on. So that's a plug for them. Another one would be, we're looking at the Gunnison Basin, and actually looking at, we're blessed in Colorado with 2 sage-grouse species, not just one. So, so we're looking at a Gunnison sage-grouse, possibly focus area, where we're going to focus again and get the biggest bang for our scarce dollars that we have for restoration of those habitats, whether it's pinyon juniper removal, sagebrush enhancement, or whatever, riparian restoration recovery for brood rearing habitat. Again, we've been working with our Gunnison field office. I can't say, I'm kind of dovetailing on this and trying to get some more across a statewide boundary, but we've been working with Betsy and Renee. Our Gunnison field office and our Southwest District offices have been working with those guys looking at that kind of stuff. So, which kind of then talks about the climate change. We're trying to get some partnerships worked up here, and we've had a long-standing partnership and assistance agreement with CNHP to share data and back and forth. But now trying to get more applications with climate change and some of this riparian restoration and other projects. So, So the Healthy Lands focus area, I think, and the key thing is that it's a focus area, and then we outline a 5-year plan of work within that focus area. So and we prioritize those projects. What's the highest priority projects that we do, and then we just go down and based on our funding, maybe we only get down to, after 5 years, we only get down to 8 projects. I don't know, but based on our funding. So, but those projects get those focus areas get priority funding for that work. So, and I'm a real big proponent of that because I really see it gets us out of that mindset of this project level thing. Here we got to mitigate for this oil and gas lease sale. We got to mitigate for this grazing allotment or whatever. So we're getting out of these little boxes and making a more landscape level approach. So I just wanted to kind of advertise. That's kind of what BLM is doing from a landscape scale perspective. We do a lot of stuff, and Carol's going to talk more specifics about some of the botany but I mean wildlife and everything. We've worked with the Natural Areas program and identifying those programs as well. So I'm going to turn over to Carol, who works for me as our botanist, and she's a rock star. So
Well, all right. Well, I want to talk. Can you hear me? I'm always bad with these kinds of things. Okay, I want to talk about something that, as you may know, the BLM may create a little disturbance on the landscape. We've been charged with restoring the habitats, and we are part of. Has anybody heard of the Seeds of Success program? If anybody was watching Al Jazeera TV, let's say in October, you may have seen some folks that are involved with that program at the state office and their interns were out collecting seed in a weed-infested area at Matthews Winters Park, trying to show people how to collect seed. And of course, we were trying to collect rabbit brush, but of course it wasn't ripe, so we ended up collecting other things. And I still, every time I look at that, I see the seeds in my hand, I hear my voice, and I'm like, oh my God, they'll think, any botanist that's watched, I don't think I'm a total idiot. But I'm trying to bring into an area that we're not doing well. And basically, since 2002, we've been stamp collecting our way through the native seeds of Colorado. So now what the hell do you do with them? And this is a shout out to our partners, and we're already working with Mark Ashley. We're working with some folks in Greeley about how do we do habitat restoration. It really pains me a great deal when we're done with an oil and gas project, someone throws out grass seed and we call it a job. And so this is something that would potentially be wonderful for graduate students. What native seeds, and bear in mind that we have collections all over the West. The goal for each collection is a minimum of 20,000 seeds. And I can tell you that since I've been collecting since 2002, we've probably racked up about 20 million seeds because some of our collections are gigantic. So those seeds are available for people to do in some habitat experiments potentially. We're looking at what native species would be, I would hope we could look at what native species would be great competitors to some of these invasive grasses or other invasive species. What's the best thing to do after a fire? We tend to blow stuff out of an airplane. Maybe that's not given us, it's a lot of money flying to the ground, but we have no way to figure out if what we just threw out there was successful or not. So that's, this is like, I think, an area where range folks, a lot of different people could really help the BLM. And kind of come up with some large landscape scale projects. I would love to develop new plants that could be used from native plant material centers. You could, like the Meeker Center. But I'm less interested, I suppose, overall, in introducing another thing for restoration. I want to see if what we've got, what we can do with it, basically. So that's an area that we've admittedly been somewhat weak, but I hope it would open up the doors for some of you folks. So I guess that's probably the one thing I really wanted to bring out is something that we have not worked well with. We have a huge, trend monitoring program and a lot of other things, but we're not doing much with the landscape. So I'm just throwing that out there. Do you want to say anything else?
Since Carol's been on Al Jazeera TV, I've been getting all these weird phone calls from NSA folk and that kind of stuff. So, or I hear a clicking noise in my phone. So, but.
Sorry about my neck. It's like they take pictures of you, and you're like, please God, no more, and then you hear your voice. It's a nightmare.
Google. If you Google Seeds of Success, and you'll probably get the video on YouTube.
And my one intern, he's like 6'4", it's like a gentle giant.
Hey, we want to show it? Should we just pop it up here?
No,
just
please.
kidding. Okay. You know, the more people that go, the more connections I'm starting to feel we can make in this room. Because what you guys were just talking about in terms of these seeds and you know, wanting to work on restoration connects with a lot of things that folks like TNC are doing, that we're working on with COGA, hopefully. So let's keep going, though, and I think we can, after everyone goes, we can try to pull some of this together. Del Benson has a very interesting thing coming up that he wants to tell us about, so I'm going to pass this to him.
Since I'm back here, I'll just stay back here and you can twist your head around and get some exercise for the day. I'm working with a very specific project with CNHP to provide a biodiversity component, a symposium to the International Congress on Wildlife and Livelihoods on Private and Communal Lands. I've got an announcement, or a poster back there, and a brochure that's coming up to you. But this Congress, again, is about private and communal lands. It's about wildlife and livelihoods, and how you can affect conservation on those landscapes. I think it's all very clear to us that 2/3 of Colorado is private, 2/3 of the United States is private, much of the world is private, and if we ever expect to affect conservation on the majority of lands, we have to deal with those private landowners. And I wish Chris Pegg was still here, because he pointed out very clearly that sometimes if you mention threatened or rare or endangered species to a private landowner, they don't always perk up favorably. So it gets to be a bit of a problem on how you work with private landowners, because they do have these livelihoods that they have to deal with. And whenever wildlife becomes a problem with their livelihoods, whenever conservation becomes a problem with sending their kids to college or paying the bills, it's quite easy to understand how they may not always be in the same mindset that most of us are when we get up in the mornings. So I'd like to increase the partners' interests that here, and not only just your interest, but also your activities and action as well. And the brochure that's being sent around, and I hope it makes to everybody, I've got some more back here if you don't get one, outlines several topics that we're going to talk about that deal with the private sector. Everything from energy development issues and the potential impact that has on their thoughts about livelihoods, but also their impacts on wildlife. Obviously cattle grazing, human-wildlife conflicts, feral animals, plants that don't belong. A lot of topics that we can talk about, and we may not have all of them represented on that central panel on the brochure. So if you see other topics that you feel are important to you or your agency, please get back in touch with me, because we're right in a very favorable planning process right now. We're about to announce a call for papers. But before we announce a call for papers and essentially put on a random conference that just happens to be based on what people send to us, we'd like to form symposia topics at the foundation of each day. That way, if we're talking about biodiversity, we'll have from 3 to 7 speakers that are talking about important biodiversity topics in Colorado, the West, the nation, the world, that will help to kick off the opportunity for the other papers that might be submitted about biodiversity to fit into that program. Add to it, add things that we hadn't thought about, but we'll have a foundation already there. So what I'd like to ask you to do is think about how you and your organization might like to fit in. You know, it's a fairly discreet opportunity for us to brag about what we're doing, to share with others what we do. And I think you probably all will agree that we don't share enough with others about what we're doing. That's part of the problem of what we have. So the Congress is the 7th through the 12th in Estes Park. We have a website that's out there, but it's not really ready and fully operational as far as registration and call for papers, but that's going to be done very soon. Please contact me. My contact information is on the brochure. I have some business cards back here. But if you'd like to help to organize a symposia topic, let me know what that would be, or if it fits into the sum we've given, please do that. But I'd just like to close by saying it's not enough to know that we have a problem or that we've gathered data. I think we have to think about, well, so what are we going to do about it? And that's really what this Congress is about. Now that we know we have a situation, how are we going to go about managing that into the future? And if you can help, we'd love to have you there. Thank you. Question about the history of the Congress. It started in New Mexico, at New Mexico State in 1988. It's been to Canada twice. It's been to South Africa 3 times. It was in Paris the other time. And it tends to take on the atmosphere, the complexion of where it's held. When it was held in Canada, there was a big move afoot for private landowners to raise elk in captivity and sell elk antlers. And so we had papers about how to do that biologically, concerns about disease. Asians came and talked about the medicinal value and aphrodisiac value of elk antlers. But we talked about other things too. I want to look at this as what's best for Colorado, what's best for the West, what's best for the United States, for North America, because that's where most of our audience will be from, whether professional or the landowners that would be attending. But we'll also have sessions that might surprise us a little bit. You know, the Europeans don't manage wildlife and landscape quite the way we do. South Africa has a lot of fences up around their private lands, much like Texas does, which is kind of not what we like to think about in much of North America. So we'll look at different models, talk about different models, but mostly we'll show off what we're doing and why we're doing it here, and focusing on how what we do could be important to those who come to learn from and with us.
Thank you so much, Del. So, and Del's right here at Colorado State University in our department with us. So, yeah, definitely contact him if there's any role you think you can play. And thank you for stepping up to bring this huge international opportunity to Colorado, because that's a brave thing for you to do. So, just trying to organize this, I'm getting an appreciation for that right now. So, next up is Forest Service. So, Karen's going to speak a little too, right?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I'm Peter McDonald. I am with the Rocky Mountain region of the Forest Service, the Threatened, Endangered, and Sensitive Species Program. I manage it for the region. And if you're not familiar with the Rocky Mountain region, it's most of the national forests and grasslands in Colorado. The ones, forests and grasslands east of the Continental Divide in Wyoming, so Medicine Bow, Bighorn, Wyoming portion of the Black Hills, and the Shoshone National Forest. Then we have some forests and grasslands in South Dakota and Cimarron National Grassland in Kansas. So it's a wide swath and a lot of interesting issues, particularly related to species conservation. We have Karen Lee here from our Resource Information Program for the region as well. Steve Olson from the Pike and San Isabel National Forest and Cimarron and Comanche National Grassland. I think Steve Popovich from the Arapahoe Roosevelt and Pawnee National Grassland. And we do have regrets from 3 people that up until 24 hours ago were planning to be here as well. Robert Skorkowski, who is based in Steamboat Springs, and they're having quite a bit of weather over there right now. And he's been quite a leader in our work with the Natural Heritage Program here in Colorado. So he was really hoping to be here and couldn't because of the weather. Kelly Reynolds, who is the staff officer on the Medicine Bow route based out of the supervisor's office in Laramie. She's also dealing with conditions over there. And then Claudia Regan, who is our regional landscape and vegetation ecologist. And it's unfortunate she couldn't be here because I know she'd have some really good input, and particularly at the larger scale kind of issues that are a little different than I deal with on a day-to-day basis at the species conservation sort of level. So I expect that I will not do justice to the full scope of the relationship that the Forest Service has had with the Natural Heritage Program here in Colorado. Mostly because I haven't been here that long. I've been here a few years, and in the program position I'm in now just in the past year, And a lot of the things that happen with the Natural Heritage Program does happen between the National Forest and Grasslands directly in the program. Although we have had some regional initiatives that the program has helped us with. But the relationship has been a long one, a very productive one, a very satisfying one in many ways. I can't know the full breadth of it, but I do have some examples. And really, I think the speakers from the Natural Heritage Program this morning touched on many projects that we are involved with, have been involved with the Natural Heritage Program over the years, and currently. And it's very diverse, just like the National Forests and Grasslands, just like trying to manage them and do things like species conservation and restoration and landscape level kind of work. Very complicated, very challenging, and it does take a village, in many ways. So things like the lesser prairie chicken monitoring on the Cimarron Comanche National Grasslands, like Renee and Joe mentioned that this morning. The cave inventories that Jeremiah mentioned this morning, Pawnee Montane skipper monitoring that happens, endangered butterfly on the Pike National Forest and associated lands, the pygmy shrew surveys, which are really interesting. We have several species on our short list of special status species that we oftentimes don't have as much information as we'd like to have in order to do the appropriate management. Pygmy shrew has been one of those ones on our list. We had enough information to put it on our regional sensitive species list, but in terms of managing where it is and habitats it's associated with and occurrence, those kind of things on the forest, we've had very little information. So cooperating on those kinds of surveys are particularly valuable to us as we try to better understand some of these insufficient information species. We update our sensitive species list for the region every 2 years now. We've done that for about the past half dozen years. And we do rely on the natural heritage programs, and the Colorado program has been very good in terms of giving us recommendations and information that has fed into the composition of our sensitive species list. And the sensitive species list is very important for us in terms of meeting our conservation responsibilities under the National Forest Management Act. So we have a short list of species. We go through this exercise every couple of years to try and have as relevant a list as we can to help us in terms of meeting the conservation issue for many species on the forest, but of course we have to focus in certain areas. Sensitive species list is one of those lists that helps us do that focus. So the program has been very helpful, has affected the composition of our list, and so that does impact our forest planning, our project level biological evaluations and planning, and developing projects, for specific species and conservation. So that does have an impact, quite a significant impact. We have had, and this is before my time in the region, an annual data sharing relationship with the Natural Heritage Program. So we do recognize the Natural Heritage Programs as basically the central repository of the best available information on the occurrence of these rare and imperiled species. And I think, as everyone knows, we are required to use the best available information in our planning and projects. So we have relied on the Natural Heritage Program to help us understand, in addition to the information we have and any other partners, what species we have and where they are, so we can factor that into our planning at the forest plan level and also at the project level. And we can say that we are probably using the best available information, which is important to us. The Natural Heritage Program has also helped us in the past with our species conservation project, and Wyoming as well, developing conservation assessments that were peer-reviewed, sort of comprehensive understanding for over 200 species in our region. So not that the Natural Heritage Program wrote all those, but certainly helped with many of them, and those have been very important to us in terms of our planning and management. I think if I were to identify some maybe focus for collaboration in the future, the data sharing relationship will continue on an annual basis. We do have new agreements that Karen's maybe going to say a few words about that we're actually pretty excited about, because we it continues that relationship into the future and also provides opportunities for the data collection side of our data relationship, so that we're not just swapping data, but we're actually working together to collect data on the National Forest and Grasslands. That goes into the Natural Heritage Program's database, and that we will continue to use in our management. So that's important to us. As I say, we do have some priority species that we focus on, and I know Robert is particularly interested in developing more opportunities for habitat modeling with the Natural Heritage Program and the expertise of the staff as well, both Colorado, Wyoming, and the other programs. So I'm sure we'll have some more talk about that. And Robert's very proactive, I'm sure, as Dave knows, and has all kinds of ideas. So he has been very helpful to us as a region, understanding some of the opportunities to continue to work with natural heritage programs in Colorado and elsewhere. The surveys, continuing to cooperate on surveys, monitoring plans. 3 big ticket items that really have been identified by others pretty much already. Climate change is a huge issue in the federal government and for the land management agencies. So as we develop strategies that are ones that we can actually take down to the ground level, and our people in very real world situations and day-to-day can actually implement for this very broad and uncertain kind of management issue that we're all dealing with right now. Lots of opportunities there to continue to work on those kinds of strategies and implementation of them. Restoration is a very big one for us right now. We are working on strategies for pretty much managing for forests into the future, post large-scale disturbances, where we should do active management, maybe where we shouldn't do active management, what that active management should look like. But it's a very big thing in this region, and certainly a big one for the Forest Service. Restoration is a huge topic, and will continue to be for the foreseeable future. And then we have a new planning rule, the 2012 planning rule. And if you're familiar with the forests and forest planning, our implementing regulations for the National Forest Management Act, basically our organic act for management of the national forests and grasslands, are our planning rule. And the first major revision came out in 2012 since 1982. So it's been quite a while. We've had a couple earlier attempts to develop a planning rule, and they got shot down in litigation. So this one looks like it may stick, and we're working on some specific directives. And the approach to species conservation is changing a little bit. And I know I'm going to need some help in trying to sort it all out and figure out what the future holds for how we're going to do our approach to species conservation on the national forests and grasslands in the region. I certainly expect the natural heritage programs can help us with that as well. So I think that's all I have, and then I'll give Karen a few minutes to talk about the agreements.
So I'm Karen Lee, and I'm the Regional Resource Information Coordinator, and I'm just going to tell you it's all about the data, right? So I'm with those data geeks. And I'd just like to explain to you that the Forest Service does have now, over the last 5 years, evolved a standardized data repository where our resource specialists enter their data. This is across the whole nation, including Alaska and Puerto Rico, where we have national forests. It covers 88 different business areas, and these are generally based in ArcGIS and Oracle as the backbone for the tabular data. So as we move forward, these different business areas have applications that they use specifically for their needs, and they enter the data. It gets culminated nationwide, so we can have that down to the district, from the forest to the region, across the nation. And so when I came to this region, we were in a contract mechanism with these state natural heritage groups over the 5 states, not exactly a partnership. So we've moved into something called a Challenge Cost Share Agreement. And this is an opportunity for us to create this data sharing services supplemental project, and then allow our forests the ability to go directly to the natural heritage groups and get data services from them for either collection, survey, cooperative things that we are both interested in that. So this has taken us now, last year we've got the last 3 states on board. So we do an annual exchange of data, GIS style, and we leave it at that. We no longer put burden on our forests or districts to give data to state heritage. If it's in our system, we're going to share it with them. And this is this level 1 for Colorado. So it is under a sensitive agreement with them. It's not open to everyone. You have to agree with state natural heritage that you will abide by their sensitive data policies and work that with them. So I just wanted you to know that we are moving forward. We do have databases. We do have quality data from our field out there that we are willing to share, and that's really what the message I wanted to give.
Yeah. Thank you too, Peter. Just give me a call when you want to start those species assessments up again. I'm ready to go. That was a fun project. And so Steve has also asked for 3 minutes worth. Thanks.
So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Steve Popovich. I'm the forest botanist here on the Arapahoe Roosevelt and Pawnee National Grassland, based 2 doors down. I'm also the acting regional botanist for the Rocky Mountain region right now. And I just wanted to bring to your attention, in case for those of you who haven't heard it in enough detail, just the the wonderful success we've had with this Rare Plant Symposium that was started about 2004, and that was a pretty strong collaborative effort between the Forest Service and the Heritage Program. And I've been working very closely with Jill and some other people on that. And that has been one of these wonderful, for kind of a low-cost, high-return, integrated crosswalking agencies and stakeholders kind of meeting where it's just a single-day meeting, and it helps us prioritize across all boundaries in Colorado what are the most important species for conservation needs, what are the most important species for research needs, some that have taxonomic ambiguity. And it's really neat because at the end of the day, an outcome of that that's really useful for all the stakeholders is these 4 or 5 or 10 species are the ones that we think need attention across all boundaries. And it feeds right into what ultimately might become on the sensitive species list, or why it not be warranted to be on the sensitive species list. Same with the BLM species of concern. And so that has been a wonderful kind of low-cost, high-return thing that I'd like to see more of. And one of the things I'd like to see is if we could get more stakeholders to a meeting like that. It'd be neat if we could get more representation by the Park Service and by private sector and by oil and gas and those kinds of things. Another thing that has had a lot of crosswalking is this Rare Plant Conservation Initiative, which is still moving, but it's again where all the agencies and all the stakeholders have had input into a process to attempt to move along some sort of conservation or protection measures in a legal manner with legal language, perhaps by the state. And Eric Lane, a lot of people in this room have been involved in that. And just to throw out some of the ways I think that we might be able to work a little bit more closely together in the future, if I don't get to say this at another time, is I'm just wondering if we could engage more universities. I know that there's a few universities in particular that are at the table a lot, but there's other universities in the state of Colorado that are doing all kinds of wonderful research and conservation and rehab and ecosystem and all these buzzword landscape level stuff that perhaps the people in this room are not aware of. And I think that there's opportunities there for grants and for cooperative in-kind service and those kinds of things. I also wonder if we could start to crosswalk a little bit more with some of the other heritage programs in the other adjacent states. And it would be unfortunate if state boundaries or heritage program boundaries were to stop that from utilizing some skill sets that are present in heritage staff at adjacent states and start to combine those kinds of efforts in these times of constrained capacity and budget. I also wonder if there's a greater role for people like the Colorado Native Plant Society to become more of a formal partner with the Heritage Program and leverage that capacity and maybe some funding that way. I also think that the Fish and Wildlife Service probably can engage more closely with the Heritage Program and with the rest of the agencies in terms of some of this polygon mapping they're doing to derive where T&E plants or proposed or candidate plants might rest on the landscape and how that feeds into the consultation process. And I think that they're kind of going at that alone, and I think that probably maybe some greater relationships can happen where we facilitate those kinds of informations and those kinds of roles. And the last thing I'll talk about is the seed production networking that Carol talked about. My force is going to get 2,000 pounds of native seed in 5 days that we've been working on for 3 years. And it's really tough to crosswalk native plant material programs among agencies and entities, but we all have, that has been mentioned before, the same challenges, the same common goals, the same sort of landscape level and restoration stuff that hopefully isn't at random, and those kinds of things. So I think there's maybe some room for more crosswalking in that arena as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. Yeah, it sounds like there's plenty to talk about with seeds among you. And I wanted to acknowledge you, too, for your 10 years of leadership and helping us run the symposium. It's been a wonderful adventure, and it really has made a huge difference. And I think it's your vision for that we have a lot to thank for. So thanks a lot. Okay, CPW is up next. Francie, you got some slides, right?
Yep. Okay, thank you. So, I've been around a while. I'll kind of take a page out of Renee's book and not necessarily talk louder. Is that okay, Renee? Or Lee? But just to take kind of a page out of Renee's book, I probably won't tell you how long I've been involved in this, but I did put on there a long-standing partnership to conserve Colorado's natural heritage because for a large majority of my career, I've been working with folks from the Natural Heritage Program on different projects. Sorry, I'm kind of short, too, so I see Dave moving the speaker so I can actually see over the podium. But, we have had a number of different projects over the years. Whoops, that ended the slideshow. I must have gone the wrong way. There we go. Okay. So, and just to give you an idea, we have a number of people here from CPW in the room that have worked on various collaborative projects and partnership projects with the Natural Heritage Program. I guess I will go ahead and name Brian Dreher, who's our senior biologist in the Southeast, in charge of all the stuff with lesser prairie chicken, been involved in the Pinyon Canyon inventory stuff over the years, probably a whole series of different projects. Brian Kurzel's here. He's the new manager for our policy and planning unit. Brian Sullivan, I think you've heard today that we have a pretty good ongoing partnership on wetlands, and he's our wetlands coordinator. I do need to apologize for Chad Bishop, who intended to be here today. He got called away unexpectedly and was unable to show up today, but he had planned on being here. Eric Odell, who's our statewide carnivore coordinator. Jeff Thompson, who's our statewide resource stewardship person for all of our state parks. Jonathan Huey, who has been keeping us in line in our natural areas program, and we appreciate all the work that he's done. And Tony Romano is here with him today as one of our seasonal folks that's working on that. Ken Morgan, our private lands coordinator. Seth McLean, our GIS coordinator. And then also Mike Sherman, who's one of our local conservation biologists. And Tom Nessler's here from the Natural Areas Council. Is Jill here also? I haven't seen her. She's on the list. But, and then myself, I probably didn't introduce myself. I'm Francie Pusateri, and I manage our statewide species conservation programs, resource stewardship, our state parks, and also the CNHP program. So we have a pretty wide collaboration. We have several ongoing projects. I think that Jeremy, when he was speaking, mentioned that we've been collaborating for a number of years on the Bats and Inactive Mines program, or the Abandoned Mine program. And then starting this summer, we're also going to be starting to implement the new North American Bat Project, which will provide baseline data for Colorado's bats. That's going to take a more systematic sampling look at bats, because we tend to know a lot about the bats relative to our mines and caves because they tend to be located in places where we can find them. But we have a whole plethora of bats across the state that roost in cracks and crevices and trees and different things, and we really don't have a whole lot of information about those animals. So we're going to be implementing a more systematic sampling methodology that is part of a larger nationwide project to get better baseline data on bats. That all ties into the white nose syndrome surveillance projects that we're working on to get good baseline data, so that if white nose does come into the state, we'll have a better idea of what its impact is going to be. We also collaborate on surveys for rare plants on Colorado natural areas, and also not only plants but animals on our state parks. I think that the boreal toad monitoring and research that's ongoing, was mentioned earlier today. I think I mentioned the partnership with the Wetlands Assessment and the Strategic Conservation Program for species inventories on state parks. And then, mapping of Colorado's species of greatest conservation needs as part of the Western Governors Association Crucial Habitat Assessment Tool, or CHAT. If you haven't had a chance to go online and look at this, just Google the Crucial Habitat Assessment Tool and you'll get some information. All of the interactive features of this aren't online, and I don't think Colorado, I think you'll get a static map at this time. But this is something that we're going to be rolling into where we're going next, which is we just are in the process of putting in place a interagency agreement to collaboratively work on the comprehensive review for Colorado's Wildlife Action Plan, which is due in the fall of 2015. So collaboratively with CNHP, we're going to be doing the major revision. We're also going to be including the rare plant addendum that was done, several years ago, updating that and then incorporating it into Colorado's Wildlife Action Plan. And we're also working, this is kind of happening in steps. So the first step was to get the climate change assessment for Colorado's priority habitats piece in place so that we can use that information as we move forward with the major revision of the Colorado SWAP. So we have a lot of things going on. We've had a long-standing collaborative relationship with the Natural Heritage Program. I actually remember when Chris Pegg actually moved to Colorado and became the director of the program, and at that time I was in our GIS group, and so I was involved in the first major transfer of data from the then Colorado Division of Wildlife over to the Natural Heritage Program. So it's been a great relationship. I've developed, good working relationships with a number of the people across the Natural Heritage Program. This meeting today was eye-opening to me, and a lot of things that I didn't know were going on that I think is something that we need to incorporate into where we're going with the Wildlife Action Plan. And so it's been very beneficial, for me to see a lot of the things that's going on with other groups, and look forward to hearing what's happening with the people that are still left to speak. So thanks very much. Thanks to David and the other Natural Heritage Program for a great meeting today.
I didn't realize that you were in at the ground floor there with that. That is so cool. Thank you. So next up is Air Force. Oh, you're on it. Yeah. There's this. Or you can just stick it in there.
How do I forward the slides?
Just so you have to click the blue button, and after that you can just use that.
Okay. All right, I'm Brian Milbachler. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Conservation Office out of Lakewood, Japan Sponholes, which some of you may have met here today at the meeting. For the last 14 years, I've been detailed to the Air Force Academy as the Natural Resources Manager, and have a long history of working with both the Nature Conservancy and CNHP on various projects on the base. I just want to say this is a great opportunity to express my gratitude to the folks at the Heritage Program that I've worked with over the years. For me, it's really a good opportunity. I look forward to spring and summer getting together with the field scientists from CNHP that come out. It's the closest thing I can recall to the energy and the level of interest and involvement that I had back in my grad school days. I really like just sitting down and having lunch with Heritage Program folks and kicking around ideas and talking about cool things they see on the Air Force Academy, and just really appreciate it. So, but it's great to be here. So I just want, for those folks that aren't familiar with the Academy, I want to give you just a quick overview, kind of set the stage for what I'm going to show you later on, which I unfortunately are going to show you a lot of fairly ugly pictures, but that'll lead us into maybe some other discussion. So the Air Force Academy sits in the middle of the Monument Creek watershed, which is an upper watershed to the Fountain Creek watershed. It's a little over 18,000 acres. When it was set aside in 1954 by Dwight Eisenhower to be a military academy, one of the reasons that the land and the area around it was selected was just because of its scenic beauty, and presumably, you know, they were going to build an academy there to educate the future leaders of the Air Force, but they also wanted the cadets to have an area where they could go and kind of contemplate their life as a future person in the military and all that entails. So unlike, you know, 18,000 acres is a pretty good sized area, but that's not that large for a military installation. But what is unique about the Academy is that about 75% of the area is dedicated to natural open space. And within that open space, there's a lot of really nice potential conservation areas, natural communities, some rare species that we'll talk about here. In the mid-90s, TNC started some of the early work on Preble's meadow jumping mouse, which involved the Air Force Academy. And at that time, they designated a lot of these areas within the boundary here as mouse conservation or mouse management areas. Follow-on work from Rob and others on the installation has expanded the boundaries of that into what now is the Monument Creek potential conservation area. And that includes things like northern leopard frog, the hops butterfly that you've heard folks talk about, expanded the range of knowledge and distribution of Preble's within the watershed, as well as a lot of really nice riparian habitat. And there's other PCAs that have been identified on the installation as well. This Oak Foothills area, this area of knot mahogany kind of and grassland habitat here on the southern part of the base. The next couple of slides, though, that I'm going to show you here are taken around this area where the red triangle's at, some of these eastern tributaries that feed into the eastern side of the Air Force Academy. So that's going to advance it. The blue button. Oh, it's not touch screen. Sorry. Okay, so here, get to the ugly. This, again, is where that red triangle is at. Notice this is Monument Branch coming down into Monument Creek, 2003. Really nice riparian habitat, nice Preble's meadow jumping mouse habitat. And in just a few short years, up until 2007, that same area. So you look at photo point here, there, that's the same area that you're looking at there. So there's two things that are of concern here. First, it's just the time scale, that things could go to hell that quick in a watershed. If you've been out in the office for a while, this is good, that's bad. The other thing that's kind of disconcerting here is this actually was a pretty dry time in the Colorado Springs area over the last probably 2-3 decades or so. This was a really dry period. So this is all being generated by development around the northern and eastern perimeter of the Academy and all that impervious surface. And what that translates into is a major increase in the volume, velocity, and frequency of runoff coming down these drainages. And the bottom line is the native vegetation and the soils in this area just can't withstand that kind of disturbance. And it's not all on the Air Force Academy. This is actually off our eastern boundary, same watershed, same Monument Branch. This is up by the Classical Academy, if people are familiar with that area. But this is the north and south branch of Monument Branch coming together here. When that picture was taken there, that cut bank was about 3.5 feet tall. When that picture was taken, that's 8 or 9 feet tall. All of that sediment now is down in lower Monument Branch and on the Air Force Academy. So the base has a conservation plan with the Fish and Wildlife Service to conserve, protect, encourage the stable populations of Preble's meadow jumping mouse. And a lot of times when you have something like that in place with a military installation, you can generate some pretty good money to do some neat projects. And I had designs in place from reputable stormwater hydrologists, restoration ecologists, engineering firms, putting together designs to basically implement kind of the Dave Rosgen approach to doing stream restoration throughout a number of different watersheds along that eastern boundary to try to protect Preble's habitat. So we were actually getting down into channels here. We filled this all the way back up to where we tried to capture the original floodplain up here. We were installing these rock cross veins, and there's some log cross veins in here. Lots of willow planting, wetland plugging, using reference reach information to go out and look at what a pretty intact, High Plains riparian stream looks like. Took all that information back and developed all these nice sinuous channels to try to get the floodplains back up to where you could have overbank flows, dissipate some of the energy, and try to rebuild some Preble's habitat. The only way we were going to maintain any possibility of keeping connected habitat, maintaining Preble's populations, was to deal with these tributaries that provide some refugia to the mice, and they can later occupy areas on the main stem of Monument Creek where the bulk of the habitat is at. Unfortunately, in 2013, we found out what real rain's like. Prior to this, back in like 09, 10, 11, 12, we had some minor events. We were getting some damage to our projects. Put another couple $100,000 into doing some minor Band-Aid type work to try to hold things together. And then 2013 kind of reset the clock on us. This was one of the few structures on the whole about 1 mile reach of stream that actually held up, and there's probably 100 trees buried there along that bend, and that was the only thing that survived. Everything else, this is actually a head cut that moved up through native vegetation here, pretty well armored by various wetland aquatic species. But a lot of the stuff we did, these rock check dams and some of the erosion blanket and the plugging and all that, was wiped out by an event. Of course, that was over a 100-year event, but basically, this watershed was primed for this kind of damage, regardless of whether it was a 25-year or a 100-year event. And that right there is about what $1 million looks like, sitting at the bottom of your drainage. So this is on Monument Branch, similar time frame, September 2013. Again, not very good habitat value anymore. The picture that I showed you earlier with all the erosion blanket, the willow plugging, that was all taken right down in this area here, and that's looking downstream in the same area. This is southbound I-25. People don't realize just how close I-25 came to being removed from the watershed during that event. The water was actually coming up over the top of the interstate at one point. So that was a 100-year event coming down through there. And it would have been a lot worse. This was actually a floodplain that we had reconstructed from some of our earlier restorations. So you can see the width of some of the water coming down through here. So in terms of stormwater needs, habitat restoration, Preble's conservation, one of the key things I need, and I think one of my primary reasons for wanting to come here and stand up, is just to talk about the need for some stormwater advocacy. I could really use some help from folks such as yourselves to kind of get the message out there about what's happening, not only in Preble's habitat, but to your Air Force Academy, which is the National Historic District. And a good part of the reason that's a National Historic District is because of the context of what that university represents within this kind of backdrop of all the natural open space that was designated when they established the installation. So to the extent that you have any sort of contact with anybody that has anything to do with stormwater in El Paso County, in the city and county, by all means, you know, bend their ear or get with me and I'll be glad to give you some talking points. But beyond that, obviously, we could use some increased or improved stream stabilization designs, improved revegetation procedures. I've talked to Dave Rosgan about this at length and taken another one of his classes since this all happened, and we've got some pretty good ideas. But what it takes to hold a stream together these days and what Preble's likely requires for habitat may be at odds in some of these situations. Rob Shore, who you heard from earlier, has been working on the installation since what, Rob, 98, something like that. It's the longest, longest continuing database on Preble's, and we plan on continuing that, looking at occupancy, corridor movement, and population trends. But in general, things aren't looking all that great for Preble's. And in the Arkansas River drainage, the Air Force Academy is kind of the core of the population, so that's not a very good sign. Which all kind of leads us to, you know, at this point, if this is happening throughout, you know, that whole eastern tributary to Monument Creek, and we're losing all sorts of connections and habitat, maybe it's time to go back and look at redoing our conservation plan, really looking at, you know, what our commitment is and what our, realistically, what we can do for maintaining habitat, linkages, you know, stable populations. And it may even be worth going back and looking at the critical habitat designation. Military bases get a free pass on critical habitat delineations when they have management plans in place that basically incorporate all of the goals and objectives and management practices that are necessary to basically do what you would do anyway with a critical habitat designation. But in this case, we may not be able to carry through on that promise, so it may be worth going back and taking another look at that. Noxious weeds is another issue that I'm involved in quite a bit. On the Academy, you've seen similar slides and other presentations here. When I got to the base in 2000, there was a 1 to 24,000 scale map on the back of a wall with a couple of dozen sites mapped on it, and mostly knapweeds and spurge and thistles. And being a range guy and knowing, you know, you've got all these major streams running through here, a railroad, a highway, all this development around your perimeter, there had to be a lot more weeds than that out there. And so we've worked with CNHP over the years, and sure enough, 2002 we did a survey and increased our species count from 11 known weed species up to 14, and went from, like I said, a couple of dozen map sites to well over, I think it was like 5,000 or something. I mean, it's totally ridiculous. So word of warning, be careful what you go looking for. But we didn't heed the warning, so we went back in 2007, you know, another 5-year study, found another 3 species that we previously didn't know about. Went back another 5 years later, found another 5 species. So now we've basically doubled our species count on what we have for noxious weeds, and we've, you know, the number of populations has gone through the roof of mapped occurrences. Here's just kind of a quick list of what's out there and some of our management priorities, you know, but kind of the whole range of suppression to eradication. The key for me is look at all the red over here. You know, it speaks to the need for these frequent surveys, early detection, rapid response. These are kind of the low-hanging fruit, the things that we can really try to do something about. And there's even some things over here where we're kind of just biding our time. Yellow toadflax, Canada thistle have gotten so out of control in some areas we've had to back off to a higher priority, the BCA areas and rare plant sites and things like that, where we can really try to focus our efforts. So future needs in this area, again, we plan on continuing those 5-year surveys. Renee and others have been working since 2004, I think, on rare noxious weed monitoring to kind of follow up on the efficacy of our management program. But we've tried to target some of that monitoring to more of a focused effort on the PCAs, some of the rare plant sites. And then in the future, I'd like to see us get more back into doing prescribed burning. It's going to be difficult after Black Canyon Fire and Waldo Canyon Fire there's a real anxiety about putting any fire on the ground these days. But if we can get back into that, I think there's an opportunity to incorporate some weed monitoring in that arena as well. We did a noxious weed management plan back in 2004 based on the information we gained out of that 2002 survey, but obviously we've doubled our species count now in weeds, so it's probably time to update that. And we've been working for a number of years with Texas A&M AgriLife on a biocontrol program for various weeds on the installation. Had some successes and some failures, and some it's maybe a little too early to tell, but for sure we need some more bioagents out there for things like white top and yellow toad flax to, number one, keep down the amount of pesticide use we have on the landscape, but also to get into some of these more sensitive habitats like the Preble's habitat, into the PCAs where we don't really want to use a lot of herbicide that could impact a lot of other herbaceous and woody plants that we're trying to keep. Rare species inventory and monitoring. There's a number of rare plants on the installation, found in large part to a lot of the work that we've done over the years with CNHP. And one of the great things about, I think, working with the Heritage Program is that you pay for a weed survey and you end up getting a rare plant survey at the same time. And I don't know, maybe they haven't caught on to this yet, but I'm kind of, because, you know, the botanists, I mean, they can't help themselves. So we found all sorts of cool things and mapped all sorts of really nice, you know, new locations, kind of piggybacking on some of this work. Invertebrates, it's an area we don't have a lot of information on. I was approached a while back by an entomologist from the Denver Museum. I'm going to try to facilitate his access to the academy and some other military installations to try to do some invert work around the Front Range. Rob's work on the Hopseizure butterfly is something that we definitely support. RMBO has got a legacy program proposal in to DOD to fund a breeding bird survey and habitat evaluation. Looks like that. I was talking to Nick earlier. Looks like that's kind of making its way through the process. So we've got high hopes for that, and that may be a great opportunity to marry up some of the veg data from CNHP to facilitate the work from RMBO. So, and then we don't really have good information on herps, and that might be another future direction to look into additional surveys. Another area where I could really tap into maybe some of the expertise in this room, sounds like everybody's really into kind of the techie stuff. We have a horrendous website for our program that basically has information about our hunting program. That's about it. And there's a lot of stuff going on the base that would be great to pull together into a really nice a website. A synthesis, that it could include a synthesis of a lot of the projects that I've talked about. I mean, the Preble's information goes back to the mid-90s, weed surveys going on and monitoring since 2002, the bioinventory work from a couple of years ago, and then tying it all back into a landscape assessment that John Armstrong did back in 2004, I think would be a really cool package to kind of bring together. On the installation, there's a big emphasis on the cultural resources aspect of the cadet area and that kind of postmodern industrial architecture in the cadet area. And everybody kind of forgets about the context of that was all plopped down in some really nice habitat. And they look at the cultural resources as, you know, everything's kind of protected under the State Historic Preservation Office, where everything's supposed to be kind of static. You know, the cadet area is not supposed to change, and it's supposed to look the same from year to year. Well, that's not necessarily the case on the natural landscape. And so I think we've got a good story to tell by kind of pulling some of this information together. An interpretive display that maybe folks who kind of have that public education background could help us out with. Installations talking about developing a new visitor center, and it'd be really cool to do something like a CPW type diorama there in, you know, Air Force Academy Visitor Center to really play up this kind of, you know, built environment versus the natural environment and how the two interplay. And we're getting a little bit more into ethnobotany. The Native Americans have really shown an interest in the academy. There's been some interest in going out and collecting medicinal and traditional plants. So some potential inventory work to be done there to kind of help facilitate that. That's it.
Thank you so much, Brian. It has been really wonderful to work with you over the years at the Air Force Academy. And you know, like so many military bases around the world, it's turning into an island of biodiversity. We're seeing that happen all over the place. But I think a huge amount of credit goes to you for being the steward of those resources, because you have gone way above and beyond to just help make sure that those things remain viable at the Academy. And so I want to laud all of your efforts over the years, and it's been a great run working with you. So, and I just feel like there's a real community of practice emerging to restore streams like you're dealing with, and the folks at TNC that we're working with have really become experts on that. I don't know if Betsy's still here. Yeah, Betsy. I mean, it made me think of the things that I've been working on in the Gunnison Basin to see what Brian's working on. So, I don't know. There might be some benefits to be gained by talking about that. So, all right, Billy's up from EPA. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to everybody today. So the title of the presentation is Meaning of the Waters, CNHP and EPA. And so it truly is the meaning of the waters. The EPA is heavily involved in policy, in the regulatory side of protection. But there's also another side that people may not be as familiar with, and that's the non-regulatory grant programs that are offered through EPA. And so that's the main way that EPA interacts with the Colorado Natural Heritage Program. Part of that, let's see, blue arrow, is the development of these wetland program plans. So this is a national effort by EPA to get all of the states and tribes in the United States to really have a plan about how to move into the future. So these are typically 5-year plans, but it is a little bit lenient right there. And these are publicly available, so you can see all of the wetland program plans for every state that has an EPA-approved wetland program plan on the EPA's headquarters webpage. And so Colorado Natural Heritage Program actually has one of the strongest wetland program plans that we have in our region. Region 8 of EPA includes Montana, Wyoming, Utah, North and South Dakota, and of course Colorado. I was actually very interested in what Jeremy said about a statewide wetland program plan. That would be awesome to see. I want to hear more about that later. But the wetland program development grants that are part of the wetland program plans have quite a bit of funding. For the past 6 years, we've had an average of $1.8 million, and that's been fairly consistent, which is actually a pretty difficult thing to do given the financial situation that the federal government has been in. And it's a testament to the fact that EPA really believes in the products that are coming out of the grant program. And so a lot of that has to do with Colorado Natural Heritage Program. We always talk up all of the products that CNHP presents to us through the Wetland Program Development Grants to headquarters, and that feedback then comes to us in the form of consistent funding. So as you can see, we have 2 states that take up the majority of our money, and that would be Colorado and Montana. Of the 26% of the funding that's gone in the past 6 years to Colorado, the vast majority has gone to the Colorado Natural Heritage Program. And that's because of their ability to network with other partners in the state. As you can see here today, we have filled this room with a ton of different partners with a bunch of interesting projects. And for the EPA in Colorado, Colorado Natural Heritage Program serves as that centerpiece where we can then fund them, and it goes out to the rest of the partners as well. A lot of our funding has gone towards monitoring and assessment, and a lot of that has been done by Colorado Natural Heritage Program as well as the state of Montana. But one thing that we would like to see is a shift from some of this monitoring and assessment to the use of that monitoring and assessment data. So the data doesn't serve very much purpose if it's not being used. So all of these great ideas that were generated today about how to get that information out are right in line with exactly what EPA thinks. So that is one little note that I would like to make there. It's the last pie chart. It's enough pie charts for one presentation. And so as we can see here, we see 74% of our funding over the past 6 years has gone to states, so at the state level. What we would really like to see is for the local government section to increase past 2%. So these local land use decision makers and zoning officials are really where we feel that a lot of the impact can be made as far as protection of some of these vulnerable aquatic resources. And that's where a lot of the monitoring and assessment information that Colorado Natural Heritage Program has collected can be used. So it serves as the basis for those regulatory frameworks that these local agencies can then use to increase protection. So as I mentioned, some of the future directions, we'd like to see even more collaboration with different partners in the state from Colorado Natural Heritage Program. But also one of the really important things that in our region we would like to see is the marketing of information to the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. So every 5 years or so, they have to come up with what's called an integrated report to describe the impaired waters in the state. To date, they have not included a single wetland in that report. That is unfortunate, and it's something that EPA has pointed out to them. We've also pointed out that Colorado Natural Heritage Program has a whole lot of information that can be used to easily put into that integrated report. So that is a major step that we would like to see. But also, just some ideas when I was making this presentation that I came up with. There could be ways that we can market some of the use of this monitoring and assessment data to the local land use organizations. You can use wetland program development grants as well as information from Colorado Natural Heritage Program to develop special area management plans, to increase watershed or wetland regulation planning, to develop compensatory mitigation standards, wetland reference networks. That's something very important that we would like to see from some of our different tribes. They're trying to develop some of these wetland reference networks, but they don't have the science base that Colorado Natural Heritage Program does. So a little bit of collaboration in that respect could go a long way to increasing protection across the state, as well as the development of 401 certification programs. So there are a variety of uses for the grants and also the information from Colorado Natural Heritage Program. And so, I'd like to end with just saying that we've kept consistent funding in our grant program because of the results that we are seeing. We have seen amazing products from the Wetland Plant Field Guide that was just recently developed, to all the way through all of the monitoring and assessment data and mapping information that Colorado Natural Program has. They're in a unique spot to really help the rest of the state build up to their level, which would do quite a lot for our wetland and vulnerable aquatic resources. So with that, we're running a little bit behind time, but I'd like to end. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Billy. We just love working with you guys. It has been great. So we are so excited about the Wetland Field Guide. So yes, we're running a little bit behind. This is great, though. I mean, I think we've got 2 more partners left to go, and we might still have a little bit of time at the end to do some discussion. And of course, we can continue that over at El Monte. So next is SLB, I think. Is Mindy here? Excellent.
Hi, I'm Mindy Gottsagen with the State Land Board. I'm the Conservation Services Manager, and I wanted to kind of give you a framework of kind of a background of the evolving framework of stewardship with the State Land Board and the use of the biotics data that we use to advance our stewardship goals and objectives. So tell me what I need to do here. Okay. All right. So not many people know a lot about the State Land Board. Any state that became a state after the state of Ohio was given state trust lands to generate revenue for the benefit of the school and public institutions. And so these are commonly referred to as the school sections. Colorado, when it became a state, was given 2 sections in every township range. There's some areas of the state where we have very few, if any, state trust lands, because those were the Indian territories at the time of statehood. And so in lieu of those lands, we received extra lands in other parts of the state. And actually, we're just still finishing up that last little bit of debt that we have from the federal government, the last, I think it's 18,000 acres that we'll be getting, hopefully in the next couple of years. And we own both. We don't always own, when we were granted that ownership, we were given mineral and subsurface, the surface and subsurface estate. We've since sold some of that land and bought other surface land, so we don't always own the intact estate. But in any case, this kind of shows the distribution of our ownership. We have about 4 million acres of subsurface land and 2.88, almost 3 million acres of surface lands. Yes? Oh, okay, sure. So I'll just advance that. Did I do that right? You got it. Okay. The State Land Board adopted a strategic plan, and it's updated that plan, but it's a 5-year plan, and goal 2 of its 6 plans was to advance, to fully realize the vision of Colorado citizens as expressed in Amendment 16 for the stewardship of its lands that it holds in perpetual trust, especially those in the stewardship trust. Many of you here, I'm sure, helped work toward the passage of Amendment 16 back in 1996, which was to set aside 10% of the state's 2.88, or at that time about 3 million acres of surface lands into what's called the Stewardship Trust. And so that's kind of the avenue where much of the state's attention for stewardship was directed, was within the Stewardship Trust. And in 1996, and between 1998 and 2000, 800,000 acres of lands were nominated to go into that Stewardship Trust, and the board eventually selected 300,000. And today we still have almost, we have to hover between 295,000 and 300,000 acres of lands in the Stewardship Trust, and that's what we have. Do I keep?
You want that one. There you go.
I want that one. Okay.
There you go.
So I just want to go back to the stewardship, back to that strategic plan goal, because it's going to kind of form the focus of some of my discussion points today. There are 3 general strategic objectives within that goal, and that is to enhance stewardship of the values, the natural values found on the Stewardship Trust lands, to enhance stewardship of all the state trust lands, of the other 90%, and then finally to develop creative and diverse ways to produce income from conservation and conservation services. And that's another part of my job, is to help develop ecosystem services and the sources of revenue. One thing about the State Land Board is that we don't protect and manage our lands for the people of the state or for the future generations of the state. Our fiduciary responsibility is to our trust beneficiaries. And so we're responsible to generate revenue for those trust beneficiaries. 95% of those funds go to the school trust. That's why those lands are often called the school sections. But we also serve, we have 8 trusts. 1 is for CSU, 1 is for CU, the state's prisons, and so forth. So there are other beneficiaries as well, but mostly when we talk about the work that we do, it's for the benefit of the state's school children. And so that's one of why this last goal is to actually look at new and creative ways to generate income from conservation services. Okay, these are the 4 values that when the Stewardship Trust was created in 1996, these are the 4 values mentioned in that amendment that the voters passed, the voters of Colorado passed, and they were to protect the values of beauty, open space, natural values, and wildlife habitat. And the board at that time considered all the nominated lands and looked at how it met those 4 kind of management, or those 4 criteria. Natural values, I kind of lump in rare plants and things like that. Open space, because any undeveloped land is really open space, that open space is really kind of locally important open space. And I'll talk a little bit about how that, and so these are the criteria that lands came into the Stewardship Trust, and that we've been managing those natural values on those properties since the last of those lands came in the year 2000. And in looking at that, the board, what I've, I guess successfully, at least at this point, is argued that if we're going to be looking at those 4 factors, we also should look at this 3-legged stool of sustainability, this kind of triple bottom line. We've traditionally, when we've managed our lands, we've looked at the economic impact, the revenue that we're going to get, and the social impact. Does it make sense for our lessees? I mean, how does that work? But we traditionally haven't included enough of the environmental issue, and so the board is taking more and more of a close look at stewardship and realizing that long-term value is enhanced by enhanced stewardship today. And so we've added the board, and realizing it's been 15 years since these lands went into the Stewardship Trust. We've learned a lot more. We have a subscription service to some degree with CNHP. We use that information in making a lot of our decisions. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Should we go back and look at some of these lands that we might have passed over, that we've learned more about? And so the board wanted to go into a process of kind of, quote, realigning the Stewardship Trust and like taking a second look at some of these lands that we may have missed. And so I argued, or I suggested, that we look at this sustainability issue too. And what that meant is that looking at biodiversity and then helping our board understand why biodiversity was important. Because mutual survival creates a balanced ecosystem. Here I'm preaching to the choir, and I need to tell you all these things about why biodiversity is important. It provides lessons for scientists. But what I wanted to emphasize to our board is that biodiversity boosts ecosystem productivity and resiliency and long-term sustainability. There's a very real understanding that that the board is, I guess, stewards of these lands for perpetuity. We're going to own these lands in perpetuity, and so we have a responsibility not just to today's generation of school children, but to future generations, 500 years from now. And so with that understanding, they're taking a greater look at what does long-term sustainability mean. And so to borrow a phrase from Chris Pegg, I suggested that when we look at this realignment of the Stewardship Trust, we look at all the least. Those are the lands with the highest biodiversity, the rarest and the most threatened of plant and animal species, and those with fully tracked plant and plant communities, and then the best of the rest. And so looking at lands with statewide significance versus just having local importance of beauty, open space, and geologic, archaeological, and paleontological features. And these are all lands, well, this one over here on the far left is not, or your far right is not a state trust land, but most of these other pictures are. But when Renee was talking about what's an ugly system, helping our board understand what is beautiful. This is the tradition. This other picture of Wilson Mesa has very traditional values of what beauty is, and yet recognizing that these very barren landscapes can also have a beauty of their own. And then also with the open space, really prioritizing open space that's of statewide significance versus just local significance, like of local importance. And so as part of this realignment of the Stewardship Trust is to kind of begin to take out those lands that are really just locally important and try to work with GOCO and local governments to actually protect those lands. And so in terms of realigning the Stewardship Trust, we're looking more at biodiversity, statewide significance, and because we can't put everything in there because all of our lands have something, we have to look at threat status and how those lands with the highest threats would have a higher likelihood to go into the Stewardship Trust and have this higher level of management protection than those that have a very low threat. And that's a process that I'm hoping the board will finish this coming fall. So in terms of that realignment, one thing that we worked with CNHP to do is to kind of give us an updated understanding of all of our lands as of 2011. And so what we did was have them look at, to come up with a value, kind of a conservation value for each of our for each of our sections. And what they did was they combined biodiversity, which I think was actually a factor of a combination of 8 different factors, and their landscape integrity. This is the human footprint map that Renee talked about earlier. And what that did was come up with a value. It's hard to see this. It's a very pale green, a medium green, and a darker green. So every one of our sections was given a dot of a color of whether it had relatively, just within our state sections, relatively high conservation value, moderate, or low conservation value, to help us target, okay, which parcels should we go take a closer look at. It's important to look at this map too and to know that just because some areas are light green doesn't mean they don't necessarily have high conservation values or important natural values. It just means it may be that no one's gone there to look at that yet. But what we did was we actually did go first to those areas with the darker green color to really look at those and conduct natural resource inventories. Part of this process involved hiring CNHP to help do those inventories, and we've also since hired biologists to help do that because we wanted more feet on the ground and for not to take so long. What this did was give us a map, and this is kind of like a close-ups of certain of our larger parcels. And so what this gave us was a value for each section level, because we have some of these properties that are 80,000, 50,000 acres, like in size, that we wanted. In the past, the Stewardship Trust took the entire leased area, whether it was a single section or 5,000 acres or 50,000 acres, and put it into the Stewardship Trust. Because we're size limited for the Stewardship Trust, it can only be 300,000 acres. Those bigger properties took up a lot of space within the Stewardship Trust, and what we're doing now is kind of overall our properties, our parcels within that Stewardship Trust, that 10% that receive that extra level of protection from new development are going to tend to be smaller pieces. And I'll talk a little bit about what's going to take the place of that on some of these larger tracts. So I just wanted to run through just a handful of properties that are probably going to be coming into the Stewardship Trust. This is a property we've kind of dubbed the Magic Forest Fen. This is a fen in Park County that was previously unknown. It hadn't been tracked as any other tracking of fens. We were not aware of it on our property, and it's a forested, extremely rich fen of exceptional quality. And so this is one that we'll be recommending to go into the Stewardship Trust. This is a property just north of here in Larimer County, Table Rock, several fully tracked plant communities. Agnes Lake in Jackson County, part of the state forest, several tracked plant communities and rare columbines. For beauty and for local, I guess, historical significance, this is a property in southern Park County, northern Fremont County, called Buffalo Drop. It's down in the lower right. You can see a kind of a slightly better picture of it, but this is about an 80-foot to 100-foot cliff that Native Americans used to push the buffalo off of. It also has several tract communities and a rare willow. And then just finally, one of our properties from the far west, the northwest, again, several fully tracked plant communities and in excellent condition with high-quality wildlife habitat. So one thing our board is beginning to understand is kind of these emerging trends that are happening within conservation and stewardship, and that is this landscape scale conservation that we'll hear a little bit more about soon, with a focus on ecosystems and increasing collaboration among all levels of government. And looking at the ecological health in the entire system versus a single species. And then sustainability, which looks at biodiversity and ecological integrity. So this is really kind of a snapshot of just the evolution of our vision of stewardship. Pre-Amendment 16 in 1996, we really focused on, there were the CNAP, the Natural Areas Program. 5 of the state trust lands parcels were designated as natural areas, and we really just relied on long-term non-development leases. Between 1996 and 2012, that's when the Stewardship Trust came into existence, and then 18 more areas were designated within the Natural Areas Program. And since 2013, we've developed this new framework. One is this kind of new Stewardship Trust based on biodiversity and sustainability. The stewardship action plans that I'll talk a little bit about are integrated resource management plans for our very large properties over 25,000 acres. Continuing to work with their CNAP designated areas, and then also a focus on ecosystem services. So what is a stewardship action plan? These are all the elements of, oops, I'll go back, of a traditional conservation action plan that's promoted and I guess taught by the Nature Conservancy. I had proposed these as conservation action plans within the State Land Board, and they said, we don't like that word conservation, just make it stewardship. I said, okay, stewardship action plan. But it's effectively the same thing, which is kind of a management plan targeted at a specific species or ecosystem. It's landscape scale, involves collaboration with stakeholders, adaptive management. And so I'm working with our staff and contractors to develop these conservation action plans towards a few specific species or ecosystems. For some of these, we're just piggybacking on this landscape scale conservation work that's being done by federal agencies and state agencies. And what this is really going to take is, while we don't really need another plan to look at how we deal with sage-grouse, it will be important for us to know collectively within the Land Board, what do we want our lessees to be doing? What can we do better to do right by this bird? And so that's one of these stewardship action plans that we'll be working on. We have over 350,000 acres in the greater sage-grouse habitat areas, and so we're the second largest landowner in the state after after the federal government. So we have a really big role, especially in certain areas, and one of these is the greater sage-grouse areas. The second one is also developing a plan of how do we deal with, we have about 75 parcels, and this is more in our standard traditional checkerboard pattern within the lesser prairie chicken habitat areas. What do we do? We've already gone out and done quick assessments on those properties. Are they high, medium, or low? What are the site conditions on there? We'll be bringing that back to our board to say how can we come up with a concerted set of policies or activities or best management practices for the lands that we control within these areas. Another one is our mountain fens. We have a number of properties that have extreme rich or rich fens on them. The picture down on the right is actually one of our fens that wasn't managed well, and so it's been heavily impacted by cattle and grazing. And one of the things is making sure that we go out and look at all the properties of ours that have fens on them and make sure that we get specific management plans for each of those. Riparian areas and wetlands is another area that eventually have targeted to work on for an action plan. Piedmont tallgrass prairie, the southeast Colorado and Purgatory River Canyon lands, we have a couple of very large properties down there. The central shortgrass prairie with the different species that are located there, and how do we mitigate some of the impacts that are happening on those properties. So this is just a really kind of a really rough sketch of just an overview of some of these areas that we're, and here I still have conservation action plans, but that we're taking kind of a concerted look at. So this would affect lands that there may or may not be in the Stewardship Trust, but mostly are not in what we call the Stewardship Trust. So they'd be the greater sage-grouse, the lesser prairie chicken, the Gunnison sage-grouse, our mountain fens, mostly which are concentrated in Park County and northern Fremont County, and the greater prairie chicken. And this chart kind of just shows our 5-year time frame for working on those plans. And this would involve kind of rapid field inspections or field inventories of all of our lands within these areas. And so last year we started working on this lesser prairie chicken, Gunnison sage-grouse, greater sage-grouse, and mountain fens. And we hope to have a plan before our board, at least for the mountain fens, by the end of this summer. For those properties that have come out of the Stewardship Trust or never in it, but are very large properties of, say, 25,000 to 80,000 acres, we've developed integrated management plans on a broad scale. This is the Lowry Range located on the southeast corner of the Denver metro area. It's 26,000 acres. And the board, in considering a plan to allow oil and gas development on that property, wanted to take a look at what was important to protect there. And so we worked with CNHP. We hired them in 2005, again in 2010 and 11 to update the biological inventories for this property, and came up with a tiered map that controls or directs development on that property. So Tier 1, which is it's that kind of light green area and mostly follows the 2 cottonwood riparian galleries that go through the property from south to north. It also includes 4 adjudicated reservoirs that we had legal obligations for. So that was where we didn't want any development to happen. Secondly, all the kind of yellow areas included things like black-tailed prairie dog colonies, a special subspecies of pocket gophers, and a couple of other species. Then we had the red areas, and that's where this property had already been disturbed. It was actually part of the former Lowry Range bombing and gunnery range. And so these were areas that had been heavily impacted. And so we said, if you're going to do oil and gas development, please do it there first. And that's exactly what's happening. In fact, in addition to this tiered system, we created a series of acreage penalties, if you will, to incentivize the location of oil and gas development away from the most important areas. The Tier 4, which is that green, completely off limits, no oil and gas development whatsoever. Tier 2, which is the controlled surface occupancy, any acreage counts double. They're only allowed to, there's 26,000 acres, they're only allowed to disturb 640 acres total. And so if they locate oil and gas development on the yellow areas, it counts twice towards that acreage total. In the gray area, it's just 1-to-1. And in the green, the red area, it's basically free. They don't have to count that toward their 640-acre total surface disturbance. And so this is the kind of map that we want to do for our other large properties. Kind of take what's there ecologically, and so using that biotics data from CNHP is a really critical part of that. We also use the CNHP biotics data for our internal asset analyses. We sell, we don't have the same configuration of lands that we have when we were granted statehood, and we've probably entertained about 8 to 10 requests to either sell or buy lands through the year. And an important part of that is an analysis of how our lands might be affected through either stewardship value, the natural values, or ecosystem services. These 3 pieces that are outlined in blue, section 16, 30, and 36, represent a recent request from someone to purchase those. Part of that process involves staff members with different business lines, whatever, to comment on that, like impact. And so I was able to talk about what may or may not be there on these properties or nearby. And that goes whether we buy land or sell land. Also, internal review of state trust lands nominated for oil and gas development. The use of the biotics data is very important for that. We also use data from the COGCC website and what's available from Parks and Wildlife. And then just briefly, I just want to touch on with ecosystem services. We have 4 kind of levels of evaluation for ecosystem services potential. We have this kind of broad level view, which properties are located in which ecoregion. We kind of do a desktop analysis to see, and we do an overlay process of different service areas, wetland maps, species habitat maps. We go out and walk the site to do a site evaluations, and then if that looks promising, we bring in experts to do an in-depth site analysis. And so we're just beginning to work with several projects to develop mostly in wetland mitigation. We're involved with the stream mitigation process, the development of metrics for that, and also involved with the Colorado Habitat Exchange. Yeah?
Just do a quick time check with you because we're at 3:20.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, this is the last slide. Okay. And then this is just kind of our windshield analysis, a decision support system. So, thanks so much.
Mindy. Those are beautiful pictures, and I hated to have to poke you there because this is really great stuff, and I think SLB deserves an immense amount of credit for your visionary approach to land management, and it's wonderful to work with you on that. Now, before Kevin goes, Kevin's going last because he's representing the Southern Rockies LCC, and their role is to really roll everything up, so it seemed appropriate that Kevin get the floor here after you all had a chance to go. Now, I wanted to acknowledge everyone who put together words to share with us today, and thank you so much for doing that. So right after Kevin's done, we'll close everything up and then head over to El Monte. But for those of you who have stepped up to offer this for us, I have a present I'm going to circulate around to you, a copy of the State of Colorado's biodiversity I'm going to give you. And we want to make more of those. We just got a bunch of money today, so maybe we can. I mean, I'd love to get one of those into everybody's hand here in this room. So, oh, well, let me see if I can get that check from Joyce. Okay, thanks, Kevin.
So I realize I'm the only thing standing between you and happy hour. So, but I do want to say thanks, Dave, for opening the doors to all of us, inviting us, having us here. This has been very informative, and again, thank you very much. So as Dave mentioned, I'm coordinator for the Southern Rockies Landscape Conservation Cooperative. I'm stationed with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service down in Denver. This cooperative is a partnership of about 20 different entities that have federal, state, tribal NGOs that have statute and or programmatic authorities to manage natural resources, direct and develop policy towards natural resources, and acquire and deliver science to make decisions as to how to manage natural resources. And so this is a map that just shows the general location or the location of our geographic area. And as you can see, it's pretty much the western half of Colorado, eastern half of Utah, and then the northern halves of New Mexico and Arizona. And you got a lighty thingy? Yeah, that's what you call them, laser pointers. Yeah, that's all right. Don't worry about it. Okay, but what I want to point out is there's 22 of these landscape conservation cooperatives across the U.S., Canada, and Caribbean, and also down into Mexico. And so even though we are on the western half of Colorado, the eastern half is covered by the Great Plains LCC. And the boundaries are very fluid, they're very transparent, we don't hold them hard and fast, we try to work very much across the boundaries of these LCCs. And again, our role is to bring a cooperative of partners together, identify what they all hold in common, what their shared priority resources are, and then leverage resources to bring them science to make management decisions across these landscapes. And so with that, we went through a process of holding several workshops in the 4 states. We did document reviews from our partners and interviews, and we prioritized and basically asked the partners on the landscape, where are you working? If we're going to leverage, we need to know where you're working. And our steering committee, which is chaired by Warren Day, sitting back there, Deputy Regional Director for USGS down in Denver, and our vice chair is, oh man, I forget my vice, Dave Anderson. Dave is the vice chair of our steering committee, and so our steering committee then basically identified that our conservation focus is going to be to design and work towards a landscape that supports and sustains desired conditions for cultural resources. Now that's a rather big category, and we recognize that. Our tribal partners are helping us to narrow that down to more manageable components, such as golden eagle, or cottonwood and willow, or medicinal plants, etc. So we are then designing a landscape to support and sustain desired conditions for cultural resources, mule deer and elk, sage grouse, native fish, and stream flows. And stream flows being both from a societal and an ecological perspective. And so now that we know what we want to, as the partners, what we want to design this landscape for, we really need help in designing that landscape, identifying what our partners have already said they want to do with those resources. We're not about defining the objectives. We're about trying to help our partners meet their objectives. So what have our partners said they want to do with sage grouse, mule deer, elk, native fish, etc.? And then, how do we figure out, how do we get there? I got one more slide and then we're done. All righty. Okay. So this is basically the framework, our adaptive management framework. And then you've all seen this. If you're in natural resource management, you've seen this ad nauseum. You have seen it in multiple different colors. They've got different shades of greens and blues. I think there's even one out there in plaid. But the bottom line is identify what you're going to work on, identify what you want to do with it, where are you in relation to what you want to do with it, how are you going to get there, then do it, implement the conservation on the ground, monitor whether you've accomplished it, and if not, adjust and bring new science into making management decisions. Our science is designed to answer the what, where, when, why, how, who questions. Where do I manipulate my landscape to address the conservation needs? How do I restore the landscape to, et cetera, et cetera? How do I, where do I, what do I? That's what our science is designed to answer. And so, again, this is just the framework that we are going through to address these resources at landscape scales. So, that's it.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, having you speak feels like a good ending point for us for this meeting because of the role that LCCs are playing throughout the nation. And so there are a lot of huge opportunities for us to leverage each other through the LCCs, and I hope that we'll be able to do that through this meeting as well. And it has been absolutely wonderful to spend the day with you all today. This is fabulous. I'm hoping we can do this again. We'll think about what you felt worked and what you felt we could improve upon, and we'll build on that model and figure out a way to do this in ways that continues to work for you. This worked great for me. I really, really liked this. I'm going to invite Joyce Berry back every year. That worked out really well. Okay, all this talk about restoration got me thinking about when we leave, because we have to restore this room back to its original condition. And so, that doesn't mean you all have to be involved in that. I'm hoping some CNHP folks can go. I'm going to have to stay and help haul some stuff out, and I'll get to El Monte as quick as I can. But there will be people there to join you. I'm going to show you a map now. Whoops. Gabe, do you know where our PowerPoint is? Got a little reminder map. This was great. We envisioned this being a chance for all of us to connect, and in our idealized vision had time to talk about this at this point. And I think what's going to happen now is that we have that conversation at El Monte, since we've come up against 3:30 here. And as you can see in this extremely clear and easy to see map, it's very easy to get to El Monte. Projector's not helping, but we're right here. Basically what you're going to do is figure out a way to get out of the parking lot here, wherever you're parked, and take a right on Center Ave. Follow that all the way to Prospect, and then take a right on Prospect. And if you cross College, you've gone too far. El Monte's in the shopping center right there. Yeah, first. Yep, and just kind of hug the shops along there, and you'll see El Monte there. And they gave us space in the back of the restaurant that we can kind of just take over. It is good. Their food is good. They have drink specials. They have a great happy hour right now.
Started by the same people who own the Rio, so you know it's good.
Yeah. Is there any final words or comments people want to share before we pack up and head over there? Thank you. Yeah. Oh, thanks, Steve. I forgot to mention that. So we think this beer might still be on tap at Odell's. Do you know, Rob? It was last week. It was last week. They still had some left. Yeah, that's what I heard too. The bottles are all gone. So just a few people were asking about that. I know. Yeah, that was funny. Thank you.
Any idea what was going to happen?